Good morning. I want to begin by expressing my thanks and appreciation to your senior pastor, the Reverend Dr. Nak-in Kim, who is an alumnus and member of the Board of Trustees of Claremont School of Theology, for his kind invitation to bring the message this morning. I have known and come to appreciate Reverend Kim for the last 6 years since I came to Claremont School of Theology. Thank you, Reverend Kim, for your service to Claremont School of Theology and for your support of your alma mater in making this Sunday a CST Sunday. Many of us know that the most ancient and lasting literature in human history have been laments. Laments are present in ancient cultures all over the world. There is a story in your Korean culture called, I may get this wrong, Sanga Songmu no Intan, which tells the tale of a young couple who were poor but dutiful to their parents, then rewarded by the king after he heard their story. As the story goes, a long time ago, King Seokjong was traveling to observe the country by concealing his identity as king. One evening, he passed through a village. He encountered a chief mourner who was singing, a female monk dancing, an old man seated, sighing in lament. When the king asked what was going on, the old man answered that it was the anniversary of his wife's death. But they were too poor, and his daughter-in-law had to sell her hair to prepare offerings for the memorial rite. His son, the rites mourner, was singing, and his daughter-in-law, with her hair shaved like a monk, was dancing to make him feel better. The king, moved at the son and his wife's devotion to the father, alerted the son of an upcoming special state examination. The son attended the exam where the contestants were required to write a passage that read, Sanga Songmu no Intan, mourner sings, monk dances, old man laments, which no one else understood but the son. The son referred to his own experience to write an essay that landed him a government post, and he went on to achieve great success in public service. In India, laments can be found in the Hindu Vedas. Laments are present in both ancient Greek texts of the Iliad and the Odyssey, written by the 8th century writer Homer. In the Iliad, for example, Andromache lamented to her father Hector, a Trojan prince and the greatest fighter of Troy in the Trojan War, about the deaths of her family members in the destruction of her story. In Mesopotamia, there is a long tradition of laments. The Lament of Ur, for example, is a Sumerian text composed after the fall of the city of Ur to the Elamites around 2000 BCE. It is composed in the voice of the chief goddess of the city, Ningal, who weeps for her city after pleading with the god Enlil to call back his destructive storm. In the Old Testament, a lament in the Old Testament has been defined as a cry of need in the context of crisis when Israel lacked the resources to fend for itself. In fact, at the very basic level, laments are simply appeals for divine help in distress. Like other ancient cultures, Laments are cries from the depths of one's being for help. It is often addressed to a God because in such situations, a petitioner feels that no human help is available or no human is capable of relieving the suffering of the petitioner. The Old Testament has a long tradition of going directly to God to plead, to negotiate, to struggle. Abraham, for example, pleaded and negotiated with God on behalf of Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis chapter 18. Jacob struggled with God before being given a new name and identity in Genesis chapter 32. While no language of lament is used in this text, they are in fact the foundation of laments. Laments take on a set formula, an address to God, description of the suffering, anguish which one seeks relief, a petition for help and deliverance, a curse towards the enemy, an expression of the belief of one's innocence or a confession of lack thereof, a vow corresponding to an expected divine response, and lastly, a song of thanksgiving. The book of Lamentations consists of 5 chapters written in the style of laments that mourn the destruction of Jerusalem and the exile of the Israelites by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BCE. If you remember the history of ancient Israel and Judah, in 721 BCE, the northern kingdom of Israel was destroyed by the Assyrians. The southern kingdom of Judah survived because it was situated in a less strategic location and because the king of Judah did not rebel against the Assyrians. But by 609 BCE, the Assyrians were defeated by the Babylonians. Sometime later, in around 600 BCE, Judah rebelled against Babylonians. In 598 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar led his army to Jerusalem to put down the rebellion and remove the rebellious king and others to Babylon, but did not destroy Jerusalem. When another rebellion happened in 586 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar had enough and so led his army to Jerusalem and completely destroyed the city and the temple of Jerusalem and exiled tens of thousands of people. It was in this context that the writer of the book of Lamentations wrote these chapters to express his or her sorrow over the destruction of the city of Jerusalem. The book begins with the word ekah, how. Chapter 1 verse 1 reads, how ekah lonely sits the city that once was full of people. How ekah like a widow she has become, she that was great among the nations. She that was a princess among the provinces has become a vessel. The first 11 verses is a moving description of the horrible situation of the city of Jerusalem following its destruction. Ekah is a word that is spoken from the very depths of one's being. A word used to express unspeakable sorrow and pain. In using the word ekah, the writer seeks to contrast between what is now and what was then. A city that is now desolate was once full of people. A city that is now like a widow was once great among nations. A city that was once a princess is now under the control of another stronger power. The writer talks about Jerusalem weeping bitterly because her lovers and friends, that is, nations that were once political allies, have deserted her and become her enemies. Her people have been taken into exile in Babylon and subjected to hard service and suffering. Line after line talks about the depths of suffering and pain. According to the theology of the writer, the one responsible for their suffering is none other than their own God, Yahweh. In such a theology, everything is under God's control and everything is derived from God. Hence, it is natural for the writer to turn to God and ask, Ekah. In fact, the word means more than just how. It can mean why. How does this happen? Such questions in the context of the writer's theology are best asked of God. In chapter 3, verses 19 to 26, the writer makes a transition from despair to hope. Hope is found through remembering that the steadfast love, the chesed of God, never ceases. The Hebrew word chesed is a word not easily translated into any other languages. Chesed is a covenantal term. In Hebrew, the common phrase is to do chesed with someone else. It always connotes a situation where one party, having the means and ability to do chesed for another person who is completely dependent on that person. In Old Testament theology, then, in humanity's covenant with God, humanity is utterly dependent upon God. And God is in a position to show kindness and mercy and give grace to humanity. The writer also talks about God's mercies never coming to an end. The word mercy in Hebrew is rechem, which literally means the womb. The word thus carries the following meaning: the feeling of a mother for the child of her womb, the feeling of kinship between those born from the same womb, or the mother feeling of the one who has given birth. Whichever meaning it is, mercy is a very intimate feeling. It is a feeling of care and protection and safety. Such is God's mercy towards God's people. God's chesed, the writer tells us, God's chesed and mercy are new every morning. In the midst of lamenting then, the writer urges the people to wait for God's restoration. Like the writer in the context of the destruction of Jerusalem, there is so much for us to lament today. As we come together this Sunday, we come remembering that our society and our world are writhing in pain. Humanity has not learned to live harmoniously with one another. And there is so much global tension. We in the United States live in an ever more polarized society since the Trump presidency. The racial divide is growing wider, and the progress made since the civil rights movement are being rolled back. white nationalists and white supremacists are more emboldened than ever. Last Sunday morning, like many of you, I woke up to the news of another mass shooting in Dayton, Ohio, costing the lives of 9 people and injuring 26 others. This shooting occurred less than 13 hours of another massacre that Saturday that happened in a Walmart in the border town of El Paso, Texas. As a result, 22 innocent lives were taken and another 24 people were injured. The suspect in the El Paso shooting, who had been taken into custody, is a 21-year-old white man from Allen, a suburb of Texas, more than 650 miles away from El Paso, who drove a long distance to commit this heinous hate crime. According to the El Paso Police Chief Greg Allen, the police right now have a manifesto from this individual that indicates to some degree a nexus to a potential hate crime. The CNN news report mentioned that the suspect's manifesto is filled with white nationalist and racist hatred toward immigrants and Latinos, blaming immigrants and first-generation Americans for taking away jobs. In addition, the alleged killer cites a fear that an influential Hispanic population in Texas would make the state a Democratic stronghold, which can lead to more immigration. A recent study by the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism at California State University, San Bernardino, found that hate crimes across the U.S. have risen by 9% over the last year, including against LGBTQ people, Jews, and people of color. Last year's 9% rise marked the 5th consecutive increase in hate crimes and the steepest rise since 2015. The most common victims for hate crimes reported to police in major cities in 2018 were LGBTQ people, African Americans, and Jews. Jews were the direct target of half of the biased extremist homicides in 2018, in the worst year ever for anti-Semitic killings in the United States. On October 27, 2018, while Shabbat morning services were being held, a gunman armed with an assault rifle and handguns went into the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and opened fire, killing 11 people and injuring 6 others. It was the deadliest attack on the Jewish community in the United States. According to law enforcement, the suspect targeted Jews online and made anti-Semitic comments during the shooting. While receiving care, he told a SWAT officer that he wanted all Jews to die. The amount of mass shootings across the United States so far in 2019 had outpaced the number of days this year, according to a gun violence research group. As of last Monday, August 5th, which was the 217th day of the year, there have been 255 mass shootings in the United States. My friends, this is a time of lamenting. The United States and China are now embroiled in a massive trade war which began in 2018. The escalating trade war between the US and China has now seen the US slapping tariffs on $250 billion worth of Chinese products, and is threatening tariffs on another $325 billion more. China, for its part, has set tariffs on $110 billion worth of US goods and is threatening qualitative measures that would affect US businesses operating in China. According to a CNN report, the US-China trade war is starting to get out of hand. Last Monday, China allowed its currency to drop sharply to the weakest level in more than a decade. And China announced its companies have halted purchases of American agricultural goods. The Trump administration escalated tensions even further later that Monday by taking the historic step of labeling China a currency manipulator. This comes after President Trump vowed last week to impose tariffs for the first time on a wide swath of US consumer goods from China. This escalating trade war will have significant impact on businesses, potentially needing to scale back hiring, and consumers possibly facing higher prices on imports in both US and in China. Ordinary people will be the biggest losers in the end. This is a time of lamenting. There are so many other issues that we can lament in our society, in our world. Faced with these issues, most of the time we feel paralyzed and there is not much that we can do. Our US Congress has not been willing to address the issue of gun control. The US and Chinese governments continue to escalate the trade war. As people of God, our most important resource is our faith. As we lament together, let us learn from the writer of the book of Lamentations and turn our despair into hope. Let us learn to turn to God for God's hesed and mercy, for they are new every morning. Let us implore God to intervene and break open human hearts, even our hearts, to do what is right for the sake of creating a better society and a better world, not only for ourselves, but also for our future generations. Amen.